I wanted to ask you, Kate, because Kate Fagan, you should check out what her and Jessica are doing off the looking glass. It was very exciting to see the look in your eye because you're saying this is a dream project for you to be able to talk about sports this way. So I will direct people to that podcast in a moment, but I wanted to talk to you about what happened with Candace Parker last night, where it felt like it fell out of the sky. That everyone learned at the same time, okay, she used to be married, or this is one of the great athletes across women's sports. She used to be married to a man, and now she's marrying a woman, and they are pregnant with a child. And so that was news to everyone, yes?
Yeah, that was news to everyone who pays attention to sports, and news to a lot of people in women's sports who are insiders. Like, because she puts up an Instagram post, and not that they're getting married, but they got married 2 years ago. And I'm like texting people that I know who are like, have been, GMs in the W, and they were like, wait, what? So this was not something many people knew, like who were close friends with her, of course, because she's been married for 2 years. But like a lot of people in women's sports had no clue. And it's an interesting dovetail to Off the Looking Glass, because recently Jess and I interviewed Nancy Lieberman of like all-time basketball fame, like, going back to the 80s, huge player at Old Dominion, and has seen many iterations of sport.
One of the first, maybe the first woman's name you associate almost at all with sports outside of tennis is that name.
Yes. Yeah, especially like from that generation. It's like Cheryl Miller, Nancy Lieberman. Those are probably the two for basketball. And she was saying when we were talking to her about like that she, had been talking to like Martina Navratilova recently, and they were just lamenting that in their generation, there were so many things they couldn't be themselves about, whether you're talking sexuality, whether you're talking about even the way they might play, even the way they might dress, just everything about women's sports back then called for a certain behavior pattern. And it was interesting hearing them just almost with envy looking at this generation now, Candace being a part of it, but also Candace bridging the gap. And that's what's interesting about Candace, because she was married to Sheldon Williams, and much of her brand was defined by this. Like, there, around women's basketball, there'd be a lot like, well, Candace Parker sort of holds up the ideal of like a mom, like that sort of that stereotype in women's sports that felt like the ideal for a very long time. And now, I don't know the inside of Candace Parker, but it was interesting to everybody in women's sports that she had married a woman 2 years ago because of how much of her brand was like solidified in this other lane.
And that she had kept it private and kept it away from the public eye. When we've also had conversations on the show about how, specifically this week's episode, about how female athletes now, to make more money and become more famous and like kind of bridge the gap between their salaries and like the level of fame that they want, they have to portray themselves as a brand and like put their personal lives forward so that they can appeal to more fans. And so like to do that and keep it private, I think is really interesting when a lot of female athletes in particular are showing more of themselves to be able to have more opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, Sue Bird will always say this thing, the LeBron thing where it's like, shut up and dribble. I mean, Sue Bird will always say like, female athletes, we have tried to shut up and dribble, but that doesn't sell women's sports. You have to sell women's sports on all of these other factors. And so there's a lot of interesting timing issues with Candace, like putting up that Instagram post now. And Candace sort of stepping into a lot of parts of who she is that we haven't known, like when she spoke openly about not liking Gino Auriemma and Gino not liking her and why she won't play for Team USA anymore. So she's reached that like Teflon stage where she just won a title with her hometown team, and she'd won one with the Sparks. She's won a gold medal. So I think she's reached a place where she's like, who can touch me at this point?
But if we're in 2021 and we're trying to have a conversation about sexuality in 2021 and what business it is of ours in sports, how fascinating it is to have you talk about the women who were the pioneers, because Navratilova and Billie Jean King were pushing the boundaries on sexuality back when it was really impolite to do so, because tennis back then was very much white skirts and curtsy and be the idea of a sportswoman that a man would prefer, that like Chris Evert would date Jimmy Connors. To go from that sexuality bending to a woman who was married to a man and now proudly marries a woman, emboldened, feeling like she can do that with her brand, that does represent progress born by those women who did it in the 70s.
Oh, for sure. And the foundation they built, even though at times they couldn't be fully, and this isn't just sexuality, but in a lot of different ways, they couldn't fully be who they are. Martina being the pioneer. She's like the Ellen of the women's sports world for sure. But I think even when we talk, I'm mentioning Sue Bird again, because she always talks about how she wants to be the person, the disgruntled former player when she's 60, who looks at what female athletes get now and they have envy, because that means that they have, the generation before did something positive. And like men's sports, it's almost like they have reached some sort of warp speed on feeling that way, because there's just so much inheritance in men's sports. But it's not the same in women's sports. There's still these like very giant leaps forward that have happened very quickly in the last 5 years. Like Sue was like, I used to hope that 20 years from now, I would be disgruntled former player. And now I'm already looking at Paige Beckers at UConn, and she already probably has numerous deals that total more than millions of dollars. And Sue, of course, NIL didn't exist, but 20 years ago when Sue was at UConn, even if it did exist, she would not have those types of deals. So like women's sports is moving fast. Even if your listeners might think that's complete bullshit. It is moving fast.
Well, you have lived long enough to actually, now you're interviewing the pioneers. Like Nancy Lieberman Nancy Lieberman was out there alone on behalf of the sports that weren't tennis. Alone. I was like, and women can do this too.
Yes. Yeah.
There was nobody with her. Who else was with her? Maybe runners? Like, was there... I feel like Nancy Lieberman is associated with basically this is a pioneer of women's sports because she gave us all permission. She gave you permission, didn't she?
Oh yeah, because I mean she's from Queens. She's from the Flatbush area of Queens, so she possessed something in women's sports.
Brooklyn. Flatbush is Brooklyn.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Did I say Queens and then I said Brooklyn, and that was
she's from Queens.
We've had so many women's sports pioneers on our show.
From New York specifically.
That's right. But yeah, she was the flashy New Yorker kid in a time when women's sports was very polite. Like when it was all yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. Nancy Lieberman was the flashy New York kid who was willing to do the media game and the hustle and say the things and rock the boat. And that hadn't been seen before Nancy Lieberman came along.